Thank you for joining me on this Thursday morning for Thoughts from the Throne. This week we're talking about boldly approaching God, or coming boldly before the throne of grace. Many of us as Christians, in our relationship with God, sometimes we're hesitant, and sometimes we doubt, or we have a fear or a hesitation when it comes to talking with God, and it shouldn't be. We should talk to God on a regular basis. We should talk to God every day. And the writer says there's a way to come before God and come boldly, knowing that He will accept us, He will listen to us, and that He will share with us His thoughts and the ideas that He has for us. Now we're in this book of Micah chapter 6, and there's two scriptures I want to read as we continue our thought of how to come boldly before God. In verse 8 again, speaking of God, He has shown thee, O man, what is good. God has shown you what you must do. Now look at verse 9. The Lord's voice crieth unto the city, and the man of wisdom shall see thy name, and hear ye the rod, and who hath appointed it. Now, in these two scriptures, we find something that's very important. If we want to be able to boldly approach God and come to God with assurance and faith, knowing that God will accept us, and our relationship with God, our conversation will be one for the best, then there's something we need to look at here. Number one, it said that no matter what your situation is, God hath shown thee, O man, what is good. In other words, God has already spoken the answer to any question that you might have. But in verse 9 it said, the Lord's voice crieth unto the city, and the man of wisdom shall see thy name. What's he saying? He said, if you're going to be a person, a Christian, a believer, who can come boldly before God, one of the things you must recognize is that you must recognize when God is speaking to you. You must recognize the voice of God. You have to be alert, and you have to recognize the voice of God. Because God, He says in verse 8, God has shown thee, O man, what is good. God has already spoken, but it's up to us to recognize His voice when we hear it. I like the story of a young man by the name of Samuel. He had to learn that from Eli. The Lord would speak to him, but Samuel didn't know who it was. And Eli said, Samuel, that's God's voice. You have to learn to hear God's voice. And we know Samuel became a great prophet of God, became a great man of God. Why? Because he learned to recognize the voice of God. You remember Saul of Tarsus? When Saul was on that horse and he was going on that road that day, and Jesus met him there. Well, the thing that Saul had to learn was to recognize the voice of God. And out of that recognition of the voice of God, Paul has great revelation on salvation. And he writes most of this New Testament here. Why? Because he learned to recognize the voice of God. And because of it, Paul says to us that he can boldly come before God. And so I want to encourage you today. If you're going to be bold, if you're going to approach God without hesitation, without doubt, if you're going to approach God and expect something good to happen, then learn to recognize His voice and what He's saying to you. God bless you. I'll see you tomorrow.